than 1% of the known serial killers of women. And when they do kill, they usually poison people they know the most, like husbands, their family members. Aileen Wuornos did none of this. She shot strangers, she robbed them, and she left their bodies on highways. By every rules we used to understand the violent crime, she should not exist on this, which raises a more disturbing question. If the profile completely failed, what else are we seeing here? So, here, the core psychological profiling of when the psychiatrist evaluated Aileen Wuornos on both sides of the courtroom, they just kept reaching the same conclusion again. She met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. That combination matters, two combinations, right? On the psychopathy scale, the PCL-R, she scored 32 out of 40, well above the clinical cutoff. That score reflects what? It's traits like manipulation, chronic lying, emotional coldness, and a near absence of complete guilt, no guilt. At the same time, her BPD traits made her emotionally unstable. Her moods shifted rapidly, time again and again. She lived with constant inner state chaos, emptiness, and explosive fear of abandonment within herself. And no relationship activated that more than her bond with Tyria Murray. That relationship was just not emotional, it became her psychological anchor point. Her attachment style explains why Unos gave up, learning that caregivers don't protect. You get abandoned or abused instead from your caregivers. Her mother left early, her grandfather was violent and sexually abusive, and trust was never safe. Trust was never earned or safe. At 11, she learned her parents were actually her grandparents. And that shattered her little ability she had in herself. Over time, this turned into a severe abandonment complex. Being left didn't feel sad, it felt like annihilation. Emotionally, she had almost no regulation, and she described what she called a screaming black temper. Like a small conflict felt catastrophic, and experts described her as a chameleon able to flip from just calm state to rage within a minutes. And chronic trauma likely kept her threat system permanently switched on. She was also very much impulsive, and crimes escalated throughout her life, from shoplifting and violence to armed robbery, and finally destined murders. And like organized serial killers, Unos was chaotic. She left fingerprints, pawned items under her real name, crashed cars. This wasn't a strategy that she was planning. It was also more lot of an emotional volatility combined with impaired impulse control. Morally, she didn't see herself as evil. She justified violence through dehumanizing her victims, calling them as a piece of puke. Later, her worldviews turned, nihilistic. She believed that the world itself was evil. Her violence was simply a response to the evil society. Near the end, that thinking escalated even further into something almost messianic, comparing her suffering to Jesus and then seeing herself as a judge of those who wronged her throughout her entire life. And throughout this all, what is the motivation behind? She is saying that she was abused and that's why she's here. People often stop at one explanation, abuse. But abuse alone cannot explain the pattern that she exhibited throughout. The clearest motivation that we could see here from the case was survival and money. Unos killed to rob. She needed cash, cars, and stability. Especially her ability to survive through the sex work completely collapsed at one point. She later admitted that killing many were about funding a future with Syria Murray and eliminating the witnesses from her life. Underneath that were deeper psychological drivers, if you could see. Years of abandonment from her parents created a constant sense of threat within her, combined with BPD and antisocial traits. Unos couldn't just distinguish between inconvenience and danger herself. The rage arrived so fast and then without any proportions. With multiplication, there was also displaced anger within herself. Her victims weren't just individuals, they symbolized men as a category, where men represented her father, her grandfather, and every abuser before them. So killing became in her mind to way to score out of them. So power mattered too. Violence gave her smothering her, never had control, choosing who lived and died, transformed her from helpless position to the dominant position. She even romanticized the crime, imagining herself and Murray as an outlaw couple too. So a trigger matters as well. Many killings followed perceived threats during sexual encounters, right? So the first killing, first of all, lowered the psychological barrier within herself. Getting away with it, the first murder changed entirely everything she believed. So alcohol only amplified the impulsivity and rage. So why the crimes, the way that she did, why they emerged, why it kept on replicating. This didn't come out of nowhere. By her early 30s, if you could see, Wuornos was collapsing completely financially. Sex work was unreliable to her, and also rent was overdue on her head. Survival anxiety was constant and peaking. At the same time, her relationship with Tyria intensified so much. Her deepest fear of abandonment. Wuornos also felt responsible for. Providing and terrified of being left behind at some point from someone. Psychological decades of trauma finally reached her, making her to like a breaking point, right? Men stopped being individuals to her after that abuse, and they became a threat to her. Her criminal behavior escalated so fast in clear steps, petty crime, armed robbery, then final murder. Whether the first killing was a self-defense or not, we don't know. Escaping consequences reinforced her dominating behavior. So murder became a viable strategy to her. And if you see her victim selection logics, whom and all she selected, those were not random. All of her victims were middle-aged men she encountered along the Florida highways while hitchhiking or working as a sex worker. This was an environment and opportunity that shaped everything that she planned for. She lured men into some isolated areas under the promise of sex. Financial gains was always present there, that she could get valuables. Killing also completely removed the witnesses. Psychologically, these men symbolized her to her a male aggressor from her past life, and dehumanizing them made violence so much easier. Her crimes were completely chaotic, multiple gunshots, bodies dumped remotely, fingerprints left behind openly. For punches were used her under real identity despite claims of control. These were just, if you see, impulsive acts driven by fear, rage, and survival. And her gender, serial killing, why she was an outlier, if you see all those dots connecting. Most serial killers, if you see, are males, and profiling systems were built on most of the time on male data. Male offenders are often driven by sexual sadism and rituals. Female serial killers mostly they don't exist much, but they kill for materials gains or accesses, often targeting people they know, using covert methods like poisoning, not direct methods. And Unos didn't fit any of these because she targeted complete strangers, and she operated in outdoor activities. She used the firearms, and that made her statistical and psychologically anomaly. So compared to many killers, She lacked the visual and fantasy in her killing. Her crimes were completely messy and only functional, repeating for money, survival, and maintaining the relationship. If you see, biology and the socialization also matter here. Men on average have high testosterone, that is linked to their dominance and sexualized violences. Women tend toward bonding responses more than men, but under any threat or defensive aggressions can also be used to escalate sharply. That several childhood trauma can override the gender norms entirely by damaging impulse control and threat regulations. Opportunities also matter here. Most female killers act within their caregiving roles. Uno's opportunities came from her transient life on highways, a predatory scope usually occupied mostly by men. That's why it's a different profiling. The serial killer, or it's just a survival of defense. Technically, she fits serial killer definition completely. Multiple killings over time with cooling off periods also, but typology doesn't just tell us the full story. She fits the disorganized offender profile, mostly impulsive, emotionally driven, and also sloppy. Not strategic, no rituals, no fantasy types, no trophies compared to male serial killers. Her violence was completely eroticized. Compared to female offenders, she wasn't domestic or covert, no indirect things, and many experts sees her as a made predator by trauma and the survival pressure rather than born sadism. And you see the trauma versus the responsibility, and the trauma explains her, but it doesn't just excuse her, right? Because everyone has trauma. Decades of abuse kept her nervous system completely locked in the threat mode. Her attachment styles taught her that trust was completely dangerous and aggression was protective at all cost of her. Some describe this as being, socialized to kill, but explanation is not justification. She knew right from wrong, and she also evaded police policies, altered stories that mattered legally and ethically too. So the first killing, Richard Mallory, is the grayest area because his rape conviction supported her self-defense claim completely in that case, because once killing became a tool for robbery, the line completely crossed that point. The failure wasn't just accountability in the years of neglect that allowed victim to be shaped into a predator that later the court can't control. So role of mental illness too. If you take a close look, who knows just behavior emerged from, if you could see, it's like merge of mental and the situational stress. ASPD explained her criminality and the lack of remorse. BPD explained her rage and abandonment fear. Her psychopathic score confirmed Collis traits. She was not completely psychotic during the crimes. If you could see closely, later on death row, she deteriorated into paranoia, but she was still deemed competent till the end. Her crimes weren't thrill seeking, they were goal oriented. And that's what makes the case so disturbing because, rational goals carried by deeply dysregulated mind is so dangerous in all the levels. And also, if you see the escalation patterns after the first killing, there was a pass because of fear and paranoia. And then she realized that she gotten away with it without any punishment. So from there, the killing became so accelerated. Also, the gaps shortened between the killings, the violence intensified, shots increased. Also, the compassion completely disappeared. Psychologically, not being caught acted like a permission to her. She described becoming cold as ice. Eventually, she admitted selective victims in advance. So survival shifted into power. And if you could see the control where the power and rage combined, Una's violence was saturated with rage. It's like her childhood brain. completely wired for survival mode, finally met with a minor conflict with life-threatening rage. Killing gave her agency, the choice to control her life. Unlike male dominant killers driven by sexual fantasies, her violence were emotionally driven and reactive too. Her overkilling wasn't ritual, it was retaliatory rage to what she felt as injustice. Society's role, if you could see, this is a case of systematic failure, not just an individual failure. Abuse went unchecked, and mental health warnings were completely ignored. Suicidal attempts received no sustained care in her case. Also, the poverty pushed her into desperation mode. Sex work made her more vulnerable and unprotected. Even in court, bias was completely clear. Evidence supporting self defense was blocked for her, and contextualization was completely erased, and then the system just abandoned her repeatedly and finally too. So the media narrative versus reality, in this case, the media turned Una's case into a caricature. So Hooker, they just named her from Hooker from Hell, main man hater, a monster in reality. Her crimes were chaotic and desperate. And if you see closely, it's psychologically unstable, not calculated sadism. She wasn't the first female serial killer. She was the first widely documented predatory one outside the caregiving role, outside the women role. Women serial killer role. Important facts were completely downplayed. Her IQ's disorders were completely suppressed. Evidence is distorted. Psychologically, deterioration happened. She wasn't a cartoon villain. She was a lifelong psychiatric crisis. That's what media portrayed her, and she. Why she became famous out of all this, as we know that she violated the gender norms constructed by the society. Women hunting men with guns, shattering their expectations. The victim narrative completely flipped. Media panic followed, and also her lesbian identity added fuel to the fire. The legal system reinforced the monster image over and over again, offering nuance to male killers, flattening her into an anomaly. So, if you could ask, could this have ever been prevented? The answer is yes or no. Evidently speaking, it is a complete yes, because early interventions in this case, where mental health care is provided, if it could stabilize the homes with informed support, everything is missed in this environment, and it could have been interrupted at all cost is the only answer that you could. So, if what is the lesson from the overall theme of this particular case? Victims and perpetrators are often the same people. Lessons learned from this particular case, if you could take, the victim and the perpetrator are always the same person, and the trauma rewires the brain completely. Neglects will compound, and silence will accelerate the pain in that perpetrator. Prevention requires early intervention and social safety nets, and the trauma informed justice should be provided. Wuornos wasn't just a killer, she was the end result of systematic abandonment.